The sky was burning, not with the slow smudge of bombardment nor the choking pool of Promethean fires, but with something older and stranger. Guardsmen on the line swore the heavens tore like parchment, a wound bleeding light. Voxcasters screamed static, and the air tasted of copper and ozone. In the trenches of Veyron's Reach, men and women who had survived a dozen campaigns, who had seen daemons crawl out of shadows and titans stride through flame, stopped firing to look up. The tear hung there, a shivering wound in reality, humming with the same low resonance as the warp itself. From it stepped a man. White hair caught the wind as though it defied the storm around him. His clothes, strange, civilian yet martial, were untouched by the grime of war. His eyes were covered by a strip of black cloth, but the soldiers swore they could feel his gaze upon them, dissecting them, weighing them. The battlefield did not touch him. Autogun rounds, loose debris, the very shockwaves of ordnance seemed to slow, bend, and dissolve before they reached him, as though the air itself had sworn to guard him. "Witch," someone whispered in the trench. Another, braver, muttered "saint." Both words carried equal weight, equal fear. The enemy saw him too. Across the blasted no-man's land, heretic warbands of the arch-traitor froze mid-charge, unnerved by a new presence not called by their gods. For an instant the battlefield paused. Then a scream rose from the chaos side, gibbering daemons baying for this new prey. The man raised a single hand. His smile was bright, cruel, amused. The ground shook. Reality folded. The first daemon that leapt found itself erased, not slain but undone, reduced to fragments of thought and colour that scattered like dust in the wind. On Veyron's Reach, the Imperium bore witness to something it had no name for. Not Psyker, not Saint, not Daemon, something else entirely. And in the centre of it, Gojo Satoru laughed. The breach in the sky closed as suddenly as it had torn. The after-image lingered, like a smear of lightning burned onto the eyes of every man and woman who had looked up. What remained was him. Gojo did not move at first. He simply stood upon the blasted earth between trenches, a pale sentinel untouched by mud or ash. His head turned slowly, not as a man appraises his surroundings, but as though the very fabric of space and air were speaking to him, every thread of existence unravelling in his perception. Sergeant Haldane of the 23rd Veyron Rifles raised his lasgun, though the barrel trembled. "Orders," he rasped. His vox-bead hissed silence. Higher command had gone dead when the sky split. No order came. None dared give one. The soldiers whispered instead. "Saint Celestine walked once like that," a woman breathed. "Saints don't wear black like a hive underdweller," another muttered. "A witch, a mutant. No, something else." Inquisitorial acolytes huddled at the rear of the trench stared through auger lenses, hands shaking as they scribbled fractured notes. The energy around him did not read as warp resonance, nor the signature of sanctioned psychers. It was something alien, a pressure without malice, but with infinite density. To them it was worse than witchcraft. It was unclassified. Gojo tilted his head slightly. A smile tugged at his mouth, private, amused. He could hear them. He could feel their suspicion as clearly as their heartbeats. Yet he said nothing. The heretics across the field broke the silence first. Daemons howled. Cultists roared praise to their gods. The charge renewed, as if to drown this intruder beneath numbers and faith. The Imperials braced for death, and then the stranger finally moved. He stepped forward. Just once. The battlefield bent. The stranger's single step forward echoed louder than the shells falling a mile away. It was not sound, not really, more the sensation of a boundary shifting, a veil being pulled taut. The guardsmen nearest to him swore their boots sunk deeper in the mud, as though the ground itself had decided to obey another master. Sergeant Haldane clenched his jaw. He had seen psychers on half a dozen worlds, had seen men explode from within, their bones turned to molten slag by powers they barely controlled. He knew the signs, knew the reek of the warp when it crawled down a man's spine like cold fingers. This was not that. This was silent. Clean. Too clean. "Saint!" whispered Trooper Ives. She had lost her family to plague months ago. Her eyes were wide, desperate. "No saint!" muttered Commissar Rain, though his hand tightened on his bolt pistol, and he did not raise it. The acolytes kept scribbling, fevered. The parchment was already stained with ink blots from trembling fingers. One of them finally whispered the word they all feared, unclassified. A word that meant only one thing in the lexicon of the Imperium: heretic until proven otherwise. And yet, no one fired. Not the guard, not the commissar. Even the most zealous in the trench felt something they had not in years of endless war: possibility. Because when the cultists screamed and broke forward again, frothing with their god's hunger, the stranger did not flinch. He smiled wider and for the first time raised his hand. The trench held its breath. The battlefield reeked of fear. Not the fear he knew, the sharp taste of cursed energy swelling off human desperation, but something older, fouler. It stank of rot and reverence, of men screaming prayers into a void that screamed back. Gojo tilted his head, watching the red-eyed zealots hurl themselves over the blackened earth. Spines bent with mutation, rust-edged chainswords raised high, mouths frothing in devotion to gods he'd never met. He could see them too, their shadows writhing just beyond the veil. Daemons, they would call them here. In his eyes, just malformed curses, things clawing for relevance in the cracks between realities. He chuckled under his breath. Different world, same sickness. People breaking themselves to feed something that doesn't care. His infinity shimmered around him, invisible but absolute. The bullets and the heat and the screams touched it, slowed, broke apart. To him, the warband's charge was no more dangerous than moths beating themselves against a lantern flame. For an instant, he wondered what his students would think. Yuji, Megumi, would they laugh or gape or warn him not to show off too much? He smiled wider. Guess I'll test the waters. He raised his hand. The cultists screamed their devotions as they surged, a tide of rust and fury. The trench line shouted warnings, las fire spitting useless beams into the onrushing mob. But none of it mattered, because in the blasted no-man's land, the white-haired stranger simply snapped his fingers. A sound, sharp, crystalline, cut through the thunder, and then space folded. The first rank of cultists shattered in silence, their bodies reduced to ribbons of light and dust that scattered on an unseen wind. The second line stumbled, crushed under the weight of something they couldn't see, their bones snapping as though the air itself had grown teeth. The daemons came next, leaping from their hosts in shrieking glee. They met a wall that was not there, talons scraping sparks from nothing. Gojo's infinity bent their hate back upon them, dissolving their forms like salt in water. The battlefield paused. Even the commissar's iron mask faltered. Men whispered prayers they hadn't dared in years. Some wept, some trembled, and through it all, Gojo laughed. The cultists struck first. Chainswords shrieked, axes swung, gunfire cracked like thunder. None reached him. Every strike slowed, until it hung trembling in the air inches from his skin, as though space itself had grown thick around him. They screamed louder, hacking at nothing, blades rattling against an invisible wall they could not breach. Gojo smiled. Persistent little things. He moved. A flicker of motion, one finger extended, tracing lazy circles in the air. The nearest cultist convulsed, his body drawn inward on itself as though crushed by invisible hands. Bones collapsed, organs folded, and he dropped as a formless heap of ruin. Another snapped away in the opposite direction, flesh and armor detonating outward as though blasted by a cannon. Blue. Red. The battlefield danced between attraction and repulsion, every gesture of his hand writing death in the air. The daemons shrieked next, rushing like shadows with teeth. They broke themselves against infinity, jaws frozen wide inches from his throat, talons screeching sparks against nothing. Gojo raised his hand and simply pressed outward. Reversal, red. A wave of pure repulsion thundered outward, bodies tearing apart mid-leap, shadows scattering like ash in a storm. And then, bored, he stepped in close. The next cultist barely had time to scream. Gojo's foot snapped out in a lazy kick, but the man folded in half mid-air, ribs crushed inward as if by a falling wall. Another swung a chain axe, and Gojo leaned aside, hand finding the man's throat. A single squeeze, just enough force behind infinity's endless pressure, and his neck twisted, spine snapping with a crack that carried across the field. He fought like a man untouchable, but still human enough to mock them in melee. Every gesture was casual, every blow inevitable. Chaos poured against him in endless waves, and he swatted them aside like insects. The ground shook as a greater daemon clawed its way into reality, a horned thing of brass and fire, its roar splitting the sky. It raised a blade larger than any tank, swung it down with the weight of a world. The weapon stopped, suspended inches from Gojo's head, trembling in the thick, merciless grip of infinity. Gojo tilted his head, amused. Big. He raised both hands, and space itself bent. Blue and red collided, the clash blooming into incandescent ruin. Hollow purple. The daemon never finished its roar, its body split apart, the land behind it erased in a gouge of annihilation stretching 1/2 kilometer across the field. Silence. Even chaos faltered. In the trenches, mortals stared with dry throats and wide eyes. The inquisitorial scribes had dropped their pens. Commissar Rain, hand frozen on his pistol, had forgotten to breathe. And in the ruinous heart of the battlefield, Gojo stood untouched, laughter rolling like thunder. The battlefield was silent now, save for the wind and the slow crumble of bodies that had been erased from within. Gojo lowered his hands, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. Not a mark on him. He looked out across the trenches, at the thousands of eyes fixed on him. He could feel their fear humming like a chord, sharp and metallic in the air. Some hearts raced, some skipped, some clenched with prayer. He could read it all. Not cursed energy, he murmured to himself, tilting his head. The air here was heavier, charged differently. The warp, the ocean he could see bleeding through every pore of this world, howled like a living storm. Yet it could not touch him. Infinity drew it back, as though the universe itself conspired to keep him separate. He grinned. Guess I'm the foreign exchange student. The daemon's ashes blew away on a wind that wasn't there. Gojo tipped his head back, staring up at the smoke-smeared sky. Different stars, different laws, different rules. He felt no fear, only curiosity. He tugged his blindfold slightly, as though to remind himself that even now he could see everything. The smallest threads of this world's violence, the vast storm of madness beyond it, the terror vibrating through the lungs of mortals in their trenches. He saw them all, and for the first time since the fight began, he spoke loud enough for others to hear. Relax, I'm not your enemy, but the way he smiled when he said it made no one believe him. The silence after the daemon's erasure was heavier than the bombardments that had shaken the trench for weeks. Even the smoke seemed to pause in the air, unwilling to drift. Men clutched their rifles and forgot how to breathe. The stranger stood alone in the blasted field, white hair stirring in the wind, untouched by blood, dust, or fire. Sergeant Haldane felt sweat prick beneath his carapace collar. He had fought for 20 years. He had seen plague walkers drag themselves out of mass graves, had seen void-born psychers rupture into warp things before his eyes, had seen brothers torn apart by chain blades. He had thought himself numb. But this was something else. He wanted to raise his gun. He wanted to shout an order. Instead, he muttered a single word, his throat dry as bone. Emperor. Next to him, Trooper Ives collapsed to her knees, sobbing prayers into the dirt. A saint, she whispered over and over, her words blurred with awe. A saint, a saint, a saint. Her voice trembled with the manic rhythm of hope, the kind that had not been heard in years on Veyron's reach. Haldane snarled at her, but the sound caught. He wanted to slap her back to her senses, but some part of him, the child who had grown up hearing stories of Saint Sabbat, the boy who had seen statues of Celestine in the Scholar, hesitated. A commissar's voice cut the air, sharp as a bolt pistol. Stand to! Commissar Rain towered above the trench wall, bolt gun drawn, his jaw iron beneath the storm of doubt, his cap shadowed eyes that burned with rigid faith. He is no saint! Do not falter, he is an unholy masquerade. His pistol tracked the stranger, but his finger refused to tighten. He had executed deserters, shirkers, men who wept too loudly in their sleep. His duty was iron, and yet here his hand shook. The guardsmen saw it. Some broke instantly into whispers, leaning together, voices cracking. If the commissar hesitates, what does that mean? It means even he fears the truth. No saint, no witch, something else. Others pressed hands together, eyes lifted. They mouthed litanies, old prayers dredged from memory. Some kissed Aquilas they hadn't touched since deployment, their voices ragged with desperate belief. The regiment fractured before Rain's eyes, half praying, half cursing, all of them trembling. At the rear of the trench, the scribes of the Ordo Hereticus huddled beneath a tarpaulin. They had been dispatched to observe the war, to classify witch signs, to measure the strength of demonic incursions. Their quills had already scrawled entire sheaves of parchment documenting warp breaches and cultist musters. But now their ink blotched across ruined pages as hands shook too hard to write. "His signature does not read on any scale," gasped one, lenses cracked across his nose. He tapped his Auspex, its screen a static blur. "Not psychic, not warp resonant." "Then what?" hissed another, eyes wide, face grey. The first swallowed. His lips trembled as he wrote one word across the parchment, unclassified. The others hissed, as though the word itself was poison. They knew what it meant in the lexicon of the Ordos. Unclassified was not neutrality, it was the gravest category of all. Unclassified meant unknown, unsanctioned, uncontrolled. It meant threat. It meant burn it. One scribe vomited, bile splattering his parchment. Another wept quietly, whispering to himself, "Better a daemon, better a daemon. At least we know the rights." Their words were drowned by the Vox. The Vox officer clutched the speaking horn like a drowning man clutches driftwood. His voice was high, cracked with terror. "Command, this is 23rd Veyron Voxnet. Contact report. Contact report." He stammered, breath ragged. "Unknown individual. Field entry not by drop, not by warp signature. Engaged enemy. Results. Results." His words caught. He sobbed, pressing his forehead against the horn. Then he forced them out. "Results. Hostile forces eliminated. All hostile forces. Single individual. Impossible vector. Request classification. Request sanction. Emperor help us." The Vox wheezed, static bleeding through. The machine spirit of the device groaned as if in pain. His words staggered into nothing. Above in orbit, those fractured syllables would be logged, debated, stamped into 100 conflicting data slates. Administratum clerks would argue over words like saint, xenos, asset. Inquisitors would already be routing ships, their seals burning hot with sanction orders. But in the trench, all that existed was silence. The silence broke not with command, but with whispers. "He laughed at daemons," muttered a guardsman, clutching his rifle like a child's toy. "Laughed. No saint laughs like that. Then he is a psyker, stronger than any. No, psykers burn when they do such things." He stood untouched. "He is the Emperor's hand. He is a heretic. He is salvation." Voices overlapped, cracked, desperate. Men argued with each other in gasps, the trench a hive of mutiny without bullets. Commissar Rain's voice cracked across it, iron forced through trembling lungs. "He is nothing! He is blasphemy!" His bolt pistol shook as he raised it higher. "Look not at him. Believe not in him. He is a lie, a mask." The words rang hollow. He could feel their weakness even as he spat them. He had lost their ears. He had lost their eyes. Because the guardsmen were not looking at him. They were looking at the white-haired man in the crater, who stood untouchable amid ruin, smiling with the light of 1,000 secrets. From the shadows of the trench, whispers slithered toward prayer. A medic muttered hymns of Saint Drusus, but every line shifted. The pronoun changed. Where once she had whispered he, meaning the Emperor, now her cracked lips whispered he, meaning the man in the field. A cook kissed his Aquila and sobbed, "Deliver us." A wounded man, half burned, reached out a shaking hand, as if Gojo might take it from across the battlefield. Faith was breaking. Faith was being rewritten before their eyes. And the Commissar, for the first time in his career, tasted the raw bile of fear, not fear of the enemy, but of the collapse of control. At the rear, the scribes wept openly now. One tore pages from his own book, screaming that all scripture was false if this could exist. Another scribbled furiously, trying to find scripture that fit, shoving lines together like puzzle pieces. They would either forge a saint or forge a heretic, and neither truth would matter. Only the story they could tell. Haldane stared into the field. His heart beat a war drum. His men were fracturing, his faith was splintering, and the Commissar's voice was no longer iron but rust. For the first time in decades of war, he had no idea what to order. The stranger raised his head, smiling as though he could hear every whisper, every desperate prayer, every curse. And perhaps he could. Haldane felt the word claw up his throat again. Emperor. This time, he didn't know if it was a prayer or a curse. The silence in the aftermath was unbearable. Even the smoke hung in the air as if unwilling to drift, waiting for permission. In the trench, men clutched their rifles and stared into the blasted no-man's land where the stranger stood untouched amid ruin. His white hair stirred in the wind, his black strip of cloth masking eyes that seemed to pierce them all the same. Sergeant Haldane tried to swallow, but his throat had locked. He had seen horrors aplenty. Plague walkers clawing out of pits, psychers exploding into warp fire, daemons that reeked of sulphur and hatred. He thought he had learned what it meant to fear, but this was different. This was something clean, silent, absolute. His lasgun hung useless in his hands. He whispered the only word he had left: Emperor. Trooper Ives broke first. She collapsed into the muck, hands clasped so tight her knuckles went white. Tears cut tracks through the grime on her face. She prayed aloud, frantic and cracked, repeating the same word like a lifeline. Saint! 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 Others joined her, desperate voices lifting into a jagged hymn, half belief and half hysteria. The commissar was quick to respond. Rain's voice cracked across the trench like a whip. Stand to! He is no saint! He is a witch! Blasphemy! His bolt pistol shook in his hand, but his finger refused the trigger. He had executed dozens for lesser sins, cowards, shirkers, men who had wept too loudly. Duty had never faltered. Yet here his hand trembled like a boy's. His men saw it. They always saw. The regiment fractured in whispers. Some swore aloud they had seen the Emperor's light upon him. Others spat curses, calling him fiend. A few raised their rifles as though to fire, but none could pull the trigger. The trench had split itself in two, faith warring against itself. At the rear, the Ordo scribes fumbled over their parchments, hands shaking too violently to steady their quills. The Auspexes shrieked static, lenses cracked. No psychic resonance, no warp signature. Nothing their lexicons could explain. One of them finally pressed the nib so hard it tore the parchment, writing the word that froze them all: unclassified. The word itself was poison. Unclassified did not mean harmless. It meant uncontrolled. It meant threat. In the Imperium's cold, brutal lexicon, it meant burn. One scribe vomited onto his own parchment. Another rocked back and forth, whispering that it would have been better had the man been a daemon, because at least daemons had rights. The Vox crackled alive with a desperate officer's voice, his words stumbling out like a drowning man clawing for air. High Command, Veyron's Reach, Sector 14. Contact report, unidentified subject on field, non-warp signature, hostile forces eliminated. His voice faltered, caught in his throat. He sobbed, audible even through the distortion. Then he forced the truth out, by single man. The line shrieked with static, as though the machine spirit itself balked at the words. Still the message carried, climbing into the cold sky where orbiting ships strained to receive it. On the command deck of the Sanctus Gloria, officers froze as the report was repeated by adepts in trembling monotone. Non-warp signature, hostiles eliminated, single man. The words hung in the air like heresy given flesh. Captain Darus spat the only order his decades of service could give. Sanction it. Send it to the Ordos, immediately. One adept stammered, Sir, if he has slain daemons, then he is a psyker, Darus growled, and psykers burn. Send the cipher. The parchment was inscribed with ritual precision, every line a death warrant cloaked in bureaucracy. Unclassified entity. Threat level, alpha unknown. Action, immediate inquisitorial attention required. Observe, contain, terminate. The words burned into the relay, encrypted and dispatched. On the orbital relay station, clerks fought over the transcript like carrion birds. They hissed citations at one another, quoting the Lexicon Imperialis, arguing over the sequence of sanction codes. Every contradiction had to be stamped, every doubt marked, every seal pressed. By the time the report left their chamber, it was 3 times longer, bloated with oaths and redundancies, and read like scripture written in panic. In the dark hull of a black ship 3 systems away, a wax seal split with a hiss. Inquisitor Marek of the Ordo Hereticus read the cipher by the light of a single lumen. His scarred lips moved as he traced the words. Unclassified, non-warp signature, single man. He folded the parchment with care and spoke into the silence. Prepare the ship. We make for Veyron's Reach. If this is truth, it is heresy. If it is false, it is heresy. And if it is neither. He let the thought hang unfinished, heavier than any order. His acolytes bowed in silence. Back on the ground, Commissar Rain was shouting himself raw. His voice cracked as he screamed the only word he had left. Heresy! But the men no longer heard him. They were praying, cursing, staring at the white-haired figure in the crater, who smiled as if amused by all of it. Some raised their rifles skyward in salute. Others pressed muzzles to their own skulls, unable to reconcile what they had seen. Faith was twisting in the mud. It no longer belonged to the Emperor, it belonged to him. The stranger tilted his head, listening to it all. He could feel the threads of their voices, the shape of their fear, the tremor of ships reorienting in orbit, the venom of suspicion crawling across parchment like ink. He smiled, faintly at first, then wider, as though savoring a private joke. "Complicated place," he murmured, and the laughter that followed was soft, bright, and blasphemous enough to echo across voxnets and into nightmares. The silence did not hold. Silence never held in the Imperium. It was devoured by whispers, by prayers, by the scrape of boots in mud as discipline cracked along the trench line. The stranger stood alone, untouchable, white hair shifting in the breeze, blindfolded eyes fixed on nothing and everything. In orbit, the message fractured outward. The cipher was copied, stamped, sealed. Every chamber it touched bloated it with more contradictions. Some called him asset, some called him anomaly, some called him saint. But the Ordos all agreed on one word: threat. In the ecclesiarchal cloisters aboard the Sanctis Gloria, priests argued furiously, their voices harsh beneath the icons of flame. Some swore the report bore the fingerprints of prophecy, that a man who laughed in the face of daemons could be no less than a vessel of the Emperor. Others spat that the same laughter marked him as heretic, mocking the Emperor with every breath. The debate grew heated, prayers colliding into curses. In the end, they did what priests always did. They began drafting sermons in both directions, waiting for sanction to tell them which to use. The rumor even found its way into the lower decks. Ratings whispered in the dark, claiming a pale figure had come to break the chains of mankind. Others warned that to even repeat the story was enough to damn your soul. The voxnets carried fragments of his laughter, distorted by distance, and men swore they heard it in their dreams. But on the ground, in the choking mud of Veyrun's Reach, it came down to one man who still had his wits. Captain Severin of the 23rd Veyrun stood with his boots planted firm, his cap low over scarred eyes and his hands steady at his sides. He was not like the others. He did not weep like Ives, did not shriek like the scribes, did not collapse like the commissar whose throat had gone raw with screaming. Severin was old guard, schooled in duty until it had carved him hollow. He had lost too many men to waste breath on hysteria, but even he felt the weight. He stepped from the trench, mud sucking at his boots, and walked across the blasted earth toward the crater. Every eye followed him. Some whispered that he was walking to his death, others that he was walking to meet a saint. Severin ignored them. He had ignored whispers his entire life. The stranger turned his head as Severin approached. His smile widened, bright and amused, like a man greeting an old friend at a tavern, rather than standing on a killing field littered with corpses. "Finally," the man said, his voice light, almost playful. "Someone with the guts to walk up." The words struck Severin harder than any bolt round. The tone was wrong. Everything in this galaxy was duty, protocol, prayer, threat. Men barked, cursed, shouted, demanded. No one spoke with that kind of levity. It was the voice of a man who had never felt the lash of doctrine, never shouldered the weight of creed. Severin stopped a few paces away, hand tight on his saber hilt. "Identify yourself," he said. His voice was flat as it had always been. He could not allow it to shake. "By order of the Imperium of Man, you will state your name, your rank, your purpose." The stranger chuckled. He pushed his blindfold up just a little, revealing one blue eye so bright it seemed to glow. "Name's Gojo. Rank, heir. Teacher? Purpose? Right now, sightseeing." He tilted his head, grinned sharp. "This place has terrible weather, by the way. You people should do something about that." Severin blinked. He had braced for defiance, for blasphemy, for the arrogance of a witch who thought himself above censure. What he received was mockery, casual and effortless. It rattled him more than open threat ever could. "You toy with me," he said. "I toy with everyone," Gojo replied cheerfully. He raised a hand, gesturing lazily at the broken field. "But hey, I did clean up your little pest problem. You're welcome." Severin's jaw clenched. He could still see the smouldering remains of the daemon, still hear the echoes of the impossible blast that had scoured 1/2 kilometer of ground. This man spoke of it as though he had swept dust from a table. "You wield powers unsanctioned by the Emperor," Severin said, each word heavy. "That makes you witch, heretic, perhaps even daemon host." Gojo's smile didn't falter. "Wow, big words, all wrong though." He tapped the side of his head. Not a witch, not a daemon, just me. And honestly, you people are way too uptight. Ever thought of relaxing? The word landed like a curse. Relax. In the Imperium, there was no such thing. Duty did not relax. Faith did not relax. Men and women worked until they broke, prayed until their throats bled, fought until their bones cracked. Relaxation was a heresy no book had needed to name. Severin stared at him, unable to speak. For the first time in years, he did not have an answer. Gojo tilted his head further, as though inspecting him. You're interesting. You're scared, but you're not broken. Most of these guys, he gestured at the trench with a lazy sweep. They're running on fumes. You, though, you're still standing. I like that. Severin's mouth went dry. He had fought in 8 campaigns. He had lost his wife to plague, his sons to conscription, his men by the thousands. He had nothing left to like, nothing left to be liked for. And yet this man looked at him with genuine curiosity, as though he were some rare specimen. You mock everything, Severin managed. Not everything. Gojo shrugged. Just the things that deserve it. His smile turned sharper, almost cruel. Which, from where I'm standing, is most of this galaxy. Severin felt his stomach twist. He wanted to draw his saber, to shout, to prove himself loyal. But something deeper whispered. If he struck, his blade would stop inches from the man's skin, just as daemon claws had. If he shouted, the sound would only amuse him. And if he prayed, his god might not answer. He stood frozen, a soldier trained to obey, confronted by something that made obedience meaningless. Gojo lowered his blindfold again, hiding his eye. Anyway, nice chat. I'll stick around a bit, see how things work here. You don't mind, do you? Severin's lips trembled. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to say no. He wanted to order his men to fire, to run, to kneel. But all he managed was silence. Gojo grinned wider, reading it as easily as he read every heartbeat on the field. Thought so. He turned away, hands in his pockets, as if the conversation had been about nothing more than weather. And Severin realized, with a cold weight in his chest, that he had not confronted a man. He had confronted a phenomenon, something the Imperium's lexicons could not cage. A being who laughed at daemons, who mocked faith, who treated war like a stroll. Behind him, the trench was already splitting further, prayers rising, curses spitting, discipline shattering. Commissars screamed, Vox units crackled. And somewhere far above, the Inquisition was already coming. But all Severin could think of was that smile. That impossible, light-hearted smile in a world where such things should not exist. It terrified him more than any daemon ever had. The battlefield did not quiet. It never could. Word of the stranger was already moving, riding along vox and parchment, into ears and mouths that would twist it into shapes of their own. The Imperium was too vast, too paranoid, too steeped in scripture for anything new to be contained. What had begun as whispers in one trench now climbed through the arteries of empire like a contagion. The ecclesiarchy aboard the Sanctus Gloria received the first fractured reports. Priests crowded beneath vaulted ceilings, incense thick in the air, arguing in sharp-edged tones. The old Archdeacon Thorin smote his staff on the marble floor, declaring it was the Emperor himself made manifest. Had not prophecy spoken of laughter that would banish daemons? A younger cleric countered, voice ragged, that laughter was the mark of hubris, of Slanesh's mockery. The chamber became a furnace of shouts. One group began composing hymns to the luminous stranger, while another composed litanies of condemnation, their quills scratching side by side on the same table. Both certain, both ready, neither waiting for proof. In the lower decks of the fleet, the story slipped like smoke between the teeth of ratings and gunnery crews. They whispered in mess lines and void shafts, embellishing with each telling. Some swore he had walked through fire unharmed. Others claimed he had spoken the true name of a daemon and unmade it. The most dangerous stories were the ones that said nothing at all, only that a man had stood and laughed, and the daemons had fled. A truth without details was more potent than scripture. Administratum chambers in orbit filled with quill scratch and panicked muttering. Vox logs replayed again and again. The officer's cracked voice, the sob in his throat, the word single man. Clerks argued over definitions. Was he Xenos? No. Human frame, human voice. Was he Psyker? No. The Auspexes had failed to register psychic bleed. Was he Saint? No one could name a canon where saints laughed at death. Each line of the cipher grew longer as scribes layered on seals and redundancies. They condemned him as witch in one sentence, praised him as asset in another, and by the end had constructed a document so bloated with contradiction it was both an order of execution and an oath of veneration. The Inquisition's response was swifter. Priority codes carried the message like a wound across the warp. A black ship's lumen burned hot as the seal cracked. Inquisitor Marek read the cipher in silence, the words Alpha Unknown pricking at his mind like needles. He spoke only once. "Prepare the ship." His acolytes bowed. The black hull shifted course. Other Inquisitors would see the same cipher, each interpreting differently. Some would see opportunity, some would see threat, all would see sanction. The rumor leaked further still, bleeding into channels it had no right to reach. A transmission coded for the ecclesiastical palace on Terra flagged the word saint. A counter-transmission from the Scholastica Psychana flagged witch. Even an old Mechanicus relay node caught a fragment of Auspec's data, recording the impossible stillness around the stranger, the absence where warp energy should have been. Tech priests debated if it was anti-phenomena, null field, or machine spirit error. Their solution was simple: classify, seal, lock. But even their databanks could not resist the story's pull. And far from Veyron's reach, in a watchtower cloister of the Astartes, a chapter master listened to the faint, like broken Vox report. His voice rumbled like stone. One man erased a host of daemons. His chaplain demanded sanction. His librarian demanded study. The master raised a gauntleted hand. "We will send a squad. If he is witch, we burn him. If he is weapon, we claim him. If he is saint..." His words trailed off. Even a space marine could not finish such a thought aloud. Orders were given. Drop pods were prepared. The wave rolled outward, wider and wider, until even the smallest rivulets of rumor were carried on lips in underhive drinking dens, in manufactorum floors, in hab shrines where the faithful clutched at tallow candles. It was always the same story, told with 100 contradictions. A man who laughed at daemons. Some whispered he was proof the Emperor still walked. Others spat and swore he was the herald of chaos. But all agreed on one thing. Whatever he was unlike anything the Imperium had ever seen. And at the center of it all, Gojo stood smiling in the mud. Captain Severin still faced him, his boots planted firm though his stomach roiled. He alone had not wept, not prayed, not screamed. Duty had calcified him long ago, yet even he was shaken. Gojo tilted his head, blindfold slipping just enough to reveal a glimpse of bright blue eye. "You look like you've still got your head on straight," he said, his tone maddeningly casual. "That's rare around here." Severin's throat tightened. He forced words out through teeth clenched against the absurdity. "You mock everything. This is war. This is holy." Gojo's grin widened. "Yeah, I noticed. Everything's holy, everyone's miserable, and nobody knows how to smile." He gestured lazily at the trench, at the commissar still screaming hoarse denouncements. "Except me." Severin felt his composure crack just slightly. "You think this is amusing?" "Of course," Gojo said. His voice was light, but there was weight beneath it, an effortless confidence that carried more force than any sermon. "You people treat fear like it's oxygen. Me, I breathe just fine without it." Severin's hand twitched on his saber. He wanted to draw, to make a gesture of control. But he remembered the daemon sword stopped in mid-swing, the way bodies had folded or exploded at the stranger's whim. Drawing would be meaningless. Orders would be meaningless. Gojo leaned closer, just enough that Severin felt the heat of his breath. "Relax, Captain. I'm not here to ruin your fun. Think of me as a tourist." The word landed like heresy. Tourist. As though the endless nightmare of the Imperium was a holiday attraction. Severin stared into the grin, into the eye that shimmered with impossible light, and for the first time in decades of service he felt utterly unmoored. Behind him, the trench continued to break apart. Men on their knees praying to a new saint, others cursing him as witch, commissars shrieking, Vox units spitting static as higher powers closed in. Above them, ships shifted course, priests sharpened sermons, Inquisitors readied blades, Astartes prepared to fall from the sky. The galaxy was already moving to crush this anomaly, to sanctify or annihilate him. And through it all, Gojo only smiled, hands in his pockets, as though it were all a game he had chosen to play. Severin realized then, with a chill deeper than fear, that he was speaking not to a man, not to a soldier, Not to a psyker, but to something far more dangerous in the Imperium, a man who refused to take it seriously. And in a galaxy that devoured joy, that single refusal was more terrifying than any daemon. His life had been mapped since he was conscripted at 15. Orders, campaigns, attrition, survival. The galaxy was cruelty wrapped in routine. Even in its horror, it was familiar. But this man, this Gojo, upended all of it. The captain stared at the white-haired figure standing in the crater, hands tucked into his strange black garb as though pockets were armor enough. That blindfold should have made him look absurd, even crippled. Yet Severin had watched him erase daemons as though they were gnats. He had seen him stop a blade the size of a tank as if it were nothing more than an inconvenience. He had heard him laugh, while the warp shrieked. And now, as Severin's hand twitched on the hilt of his saber, Gojo looked at him with the amused interest of a man who had wandered into a tavern and found a curious animal. There was no hatred in him, no fire, no righteous fury, only levity. The kind of levity Severin had not seen since his youth, before the Imperium had taken him and pressed the weight of its creed into his bones. "You've seen a lot," Gojo said suddenly, as if he had read the thought from Severin's skull. His tone was light, conversational. "I can tell. The way you stand, the way you don't flinch when everyone else is shaking. You've been through the grinder." Severin bristled, but his voice remained steady. "I have served. That is all." Gojo's grin widened. "Served, survived, same thing. You've lost things too, haven't you?" The words struck deeper than any blade. Severin's wife, her face fading in plague fever. His sons marched off and never returned. His men, row by row, left behind in shallow graves. He swallowed hard. Loss is duty. Duty is service. It is the way of man. Gojo tilted his head as though examining an insect pinned beneath glass. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. You people really don't know how to live." Severin's jaw clenched. "We live by the Emperor's will." "Do you?" Gojo leaned closer, his grin softening into something strange, almost pity. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you're just dying slower than the others." Severin's hand twitched again, wanting to draw, to strike, to silence the blasphemy. But the words stuck like burrs. He had heard plenty of heretics spew bile, plenty of cultists mock the creed. They had all been easy to hate, but this man didn't speak like a heretic. He spoke like someone who had never known fear, who looked at war and faith and laughed because they were too small for him. It made Severin's bones ache. Behind him, the trench was collapsing into schism. Some guardsmen prayed to Gojo outright, calling him Angel Savior La, Deliverer. Others shouted witch and fiend, demanding Rain pull the trigger. The commissar had screamed himself hoarse, voice breaking on every proclamation of heresy. Vox units spat static as higher command barked orders that contradicted each other in rapid succession. The Imperium was a machine built on certainty. Gojo had cracked it with a smile. Severin realized with a cold weight that he would remember this moment for the rest of his life. Not as captain, not as soldier, but as witness. A chronicler against his will. He opened his mouth to speak again, though he did not know what words would come. The sky answered first. It began as a distant thunder, low and rolling. Then the sound sharpened. Whistles, shrieks, fire ripping the heavens. Trails of burning metal tore through the clouds, descending in formation. Men in the trenches screamed, some dropping to their knees, others firing their rifles uselessly skyward. Severin knew the sound, his stomach clenched. Drop pods, they hit like meteors, punching into the blasted earth with seismic force. Mud and bodies flung high, shockwaves rattling bones. The ground shook as if the planet itself feared what had arrived. Hatches blew open in gouts of steam and smoke, and giants strode forth. The Adeptus Astartes. They emerged in ceramite armor the color of ash, pauldrons etched with the sigil of a chapter. Severin did not recognize. Each one was a mountain of war, bolt gun and chainsword humming, their visors glowing like the eyes of gods. The air itself seemed to thicken around them, charged with the weight of their presence. Mortal men collapsed to their knees instinctively, some weeping, others clutching aquilas to their chests. Commissars shouted themselves hoarse, trying to reassert discipline, but their voices were gnats against the roar of faith that surged at the sight of the Emperor's angels. Severin dropped to one knee without thinking, his body obeying habit older than thought. His heart pounded in his chest. This was no longer war, this was judgment. The lead Astartes advanced, a giant clad in ash white, his chainsword growling in his fist. His vox-augmented voice rolled like thunder.
Identify yourself. Which?
Every guardsman flinched. The word hung like a guillotine. Gojo only smiled. He tilted his head, slipped his blindfold just enough to show a flash of blue eye, and said with cheerful levity, "Name's Gojo. Nice to meet you, big guy." The giant halted for half a breath, as though the words had not fit into any category his training provided. Gojo raised a hand in casual salute. "Love the armor, by the way. Very intimidating. 10 out of 10. Do you guys polish it yourselves, or is there like a servitor spa day for that?" A ripple of disbelief ran through the trench. Men gaped. Commissars stammered. Even Severin's disciplined mask cracked, his mouth falling open. He had expected fear, defiance, madness. Not this. Not humor. The Astartes' chainsword roared louder, drowning the laughter of men who could not understand what they were seeing. But Gojo only grinned wider, hands slipping back into his pockets. The hammer of the Imperium had fallen. The angels of death stood in judgment, and Satoru Gojo treated it like a game. The leader of the Astartes advanced, each step sending vibrations through the earth like the tread of siege engines. His chainsword growled in his gauntleted fist, teeth spinning as if already tasting blood. His bolt gun, mag-locked to his hip, was a cannon in waiting. The glowing lenses of his helmet fixed on the blindfolded stranger, as if his gaze alone could burn a hole through the man's skull. Gojo didn't flinch. He tilted his head, slipped a hand into his pocket, and gave the Angel of Death a grin bright enough to feel like mockery. "Love the entrance," he said cheerfully. 10 out of 10 for drama. Fireballs from the sky, booming voices, the whole wrath of God thing. You boys ever think about hiring a choreographer? Could be a whole stage show. The words struck the trench like heresy. Guardsmen gasped. Commissars spat curses too raw to form sentences. One acolyte clutched his parchment to his chest, as though the blasphemy itself would set it aflame. The Astartes leader halted just short of him, the ground sinking beneath his boots. His chainsword roared louder, drowning Gojo's levity in mechanical hunger. The vox of his helmet spat distortion with every syllable.
You are a witch. You tread this field by means unsanctioned. Your death is demanded by the Emperor's will.
Gojo chuckled softly. Emperor's will, huh? Funny thing, I don't remember meeting him. The Astartes blade snapped up, halting inches from Gojo's throat. The teeth of the chainsword screamed, sparks spitting where they ground against the immovable veil of infinity. Guardsmen ducked and flinched as though the sound itself could cut them. Severin could feel his own pulse in his teeth, his jaw locked, his breath shallow. No mortal lived this close to a marine's blade and drew breath for long. But Gojo only leaned closer, his grin wider. Neat toy. Want to see a magic trick? He raised a single finger. The air shifted. Pressure rolled across the crater, subtle at first, then crushing, bending space around the two figures. The chainsword juddered in the marine's gauntlet, the pressure sucking it inward, pulling metal taut until its motor howled in protest. The ceramite giant grunted, a sound almost lost in the distortion of his vox, before jerking the weapon back with force. For the first time since landing, an Astartes hesitated. Gojo laughed. Not cruel, not strained. Bright, delighted. There it is, you can feel it, right? That itch at the edge of your nerves, that little reminder that the rules don't apply to me? He tilted his head, blindfold slipping just enough to show the flash of blue eye. I'm not a witch, I'm not a daemon, I'm just better. The guardsmen broke into noise. Some screamed in horror, others fell into manic prayer, praising him outright. Commissars tried to shoot into the air, their orders shredded by chaos. Severin stood frozen, every bone in his body telling him to intervene, to command, to stop the collapse. But all he could do was watch. The leader's voice thundered, raw with machine-amplified fury.
You mock the sons of the Emperor. You desecrate this battlefield with your lies. You will be cut down.
He swung, faster this time, the chain teeth screaming through the air, a strike that had ended wars, severed tank hulls, split alien titans in half. It stopped again, caught in Infinity's untouchable barrier, trembling inches from Gojo's blindfolded face. Gojo sighed, almost disappointed. You guys really don't get it. Then he stepped forward, just once. The ground folded under his heel, shockwaves rolling outward. The Marine staggered half a step back, chainsword shuddering in his grip. The other Astartes raised their bolt guns in unison, the sound of magazines slamming home echoing like a cathedral's bells. Dozens of bolt shells aimed at one man. Gojo grinned wider. Ooh, now we're having fun. He raised his hand. The air rippled, space bending inward like water drawn down a drain. A deep, groaning sound filled the air as though the planet itself resented the distortion. Blue, he said lightly. The nearest Marine felt the pull immediately. His massive bulk jerked forward, servos in his armor shrieking as they tried to resist. Mud tore under his boots, earth ripped free in a cone toward Gojo's fingertip. With a casual flick, Gojo cancelled the pull. The Marine stumbled backward, crashing into the dirt with a weight that shook the trench walls. The others roared. Human voices filtered through vox distortion, equal parts fury and prayer. Bolt guns fired. The sky lit with muzzle flashes, shells screaming toward their target. They stopped, every round halting inches from Gojo, trembling like moths pinned in glass. The explosions detonated harmlessly, pressure blossoming in slow motion before dissolving into harmless sparks. Infinity wrapped him in its indifferent embrace. The guardsmen gaped. Some cried out in disbelief, others broke entirely, laughter or sobbing shaking their shoulders. Commissar Rain pulled his pistol, firing into the shield, each round shattering uselessly. His curses devolved into raw-throated shrieks of heretic, until he choked on his own voice. Severin's heart hammered in his chest. He wanted to believe in the Astartes. He wanted to believe in the certainty of their blades and bolt guns. But here in the mud, against this impossible man, even angels looked fallible. Gojo tilted his head, eyes dancing behind the blindfold. Not bad. You guys really put on a show, but you should know. He snapped his fingers. The halted bolt rounds exploded outward, detonating harmlessly in mid-air, a firework display of wasted fury. The shockwave rattled the trench but left him untouched. This is still my stage. The Marines did not falter. They never did. The leader raised his chainsword again, voice thundering over the chaos. By the blood of the Emperor, we will see you ended. Gojo's grin turned sharper. Then let's see if your god laughs as hard as I do. The leader lunged again, chainsword roaring, its teeth screaming as they sought flesh. Gojo pivoted on one heel, a lazy dancer's spin, the blade biting only air. The Marine's follow-up was immediate, a backhand swing with enough force to crush a tank's hatch. Gojo ducked, blindfold fluttering with the wind of its passage. The second Marine surged in, bolt gun braced against his chest, firing at point blank. Explosive shells barked against infinity, blooming into wasted fire. Gojo's smile never faltered. He leaned closer to the muzzle, as though taunting the giant, then flicked his finger outward. The air buckled. The Marine staggered back, slammed into his brother's pauldron, both giants crashing into the dirt like toppled statues. The ground quaked. The third came from above. He had leapt, 300 kilos of ceramite and fury sailing through smoke. His boots struck with seismic force, crater walls collapsing around him. His chainsword carved a silver arc downward, a killing blow aimed at Gojo's skull. Gojo raised his palm. Red. The air exploded outward. The Marine was hurled back as though struck by an invisible thunderhead, his armor shrieking as he plowed into the mud, tearing a furrow 30 meters long before his bulk stopped. He rose at once, unstoppable, his armor dented, but his purpose unbroken. The squad regrouped, fanning into a semicircle around him. They moved like the war machine they were, a rhythm drilled into their bones over centuries of training. Bolt fire barked in coordinated bursts, covering arcs, driving him toward the leader's chainsword. Where mortals broke and panicked, Astartes adapted. Their fury was methodical, their tactics absolute. Gojo grinned wider, eyes flashing blue beneath his blindfold. He walked forward through the storm, hands in his pockets, shells detonating into harmless sparks inches from his skin. "You guys are good," he said brightly. "I can see why everyone's scared of you." The leader roared through his vox and struck, chainsword screaming. This time Gojo didn't sidestep. He stepped into it. The teeth of the blade ground against infinity, stopped cold, a hair from his collar. The Marine pushed, servos whining, muscles straining, every fiber of his enhanced being bent to force the strike through. Gojo sighed theatrically. Persistent. His foot snapped out, a blur of motion, and drove into the Marine's pauldron. The ceramite giant was lifted clean off his boots, crashing back into the dirt. The others surged in, blades flashing, fists swinging, bolt pistols roaring. Gojo weaved between them, his movements playful, almost careless, ducking under a swing, tapping one Marine on the helmet as he slipped past, letting a chainsword bury itself into the mud before casually shoving the wielder face first beside it. "Blue," he murmured. The air bent. One Marine staggered as his own weight turned against him, drawn forward until his knees buckled. Gojo released the pull, and the armored behemoth collapsed, rolling into the mud. Red. Another thrust back, crashing into his brothers, the impact enough to rattle teeth across the trench line. The leader regained his feet, fury vibrating in every vox-distorted syllable.
"You dare mock us, witch?"
Gojo laughed, bright and unrestrained. "Mock, I'm enjoying this. You're the first people I've met here who can take a hit and keep coming. It's kind of refreshing." He blurred forward, one step two, and was suddenly within the squad's guard, fists snapping out. His blows were casual, but each landed like a thunderclap. A palm strike to a pauldron sent one Marine spinning. A flick of his wrist across another's chest plate crumpled metal inward, forcing a grunt of pain from the giant. A knee rose into a greave, denting ceramite. It was unthinkable. Mortals did not touch Astartes. Their flesh was iron, their armor sanctified. And yet this blindfolded man treated them like sparring partners, batting them around with the ease of a master amusing himself. Still, they did not break. They reformed instantly, overlapping arcs, blades covering bolt guns, their movements as precise as the ticks of a clock. They struck in unison, fury and faith braided into steel. Gojo raised both hands. Blue and red swirled in his palms, attraction and repulsion pulling against each other until the air shimmered. The pressure mounted, hair-raising, stomach-churning, as though the world itself wanted to recoil. "Hollow purple," he whispered. The clash detonated. A streak of violet annihilation screamed across the battlefield, erasing earth, smoke, and stone in a line. The Marines dove clear, their bulk crashing aside as the blast gouged a trench hundreds of meters long, molten earth hissing where it had been scoured from existence. The air crackled with its aftershock, the smell of ozone and charred reality lingering like incense. Even Astartes paused. Their armor vented steam. Their hearts thundered like drums, but their voices faltered for a fraction of a second. That second was enough. The trench erupted in wails, prayers, curses. Guardsmen clutched their heads. Commissars fired blind into the air. Scribes tore their parchments to shreds. Gojo exhaled softly, lowering his hand, as though he had merely stretched after a nap. He grinned, tilting his head. "Oops, guess I overdid it." The leader roared, shaking off hesitation, chainsword snapping into guard.
"You will fall. By blade, by bolt, by flame. You will fall."
Gojo leaned forward, his smile sharper. "Come on, then. Show me what makes you more than just big guys in armor." The battlefield shook beneath their clash. The Astartes pressed in again, adapting faster this time. Where mortals would have panicked at failure, they recalibrated, every strike and feint building into a rhythm of precision. One raised his bolt gun high, firing suppressive shells in a staccato rhythm, not to kill but to herd. Another swept low with his chainsword, teeth shrieking sparks across infinity's unseen wall, forcing Gojo's step. The leader came from the other side, his strike aimed to bisect the man in two. Gojo danced between them, movements loose, almost playful. He swayed aside from one strike, ducked another, tapped the muzzle of a bolt gun with a finger, and sent its round tumbling harmlessly away. To the Astartes, it must have looked like mockery. To the guardsmen in the trench, it looked like sorcery. "Better," Gojo said, voice bright, as if encouraging students. He pivoted, heel grinding in the mud, and slipped inside the guard of the nearest Marine. His hand snapped up, palm flat against ceramite chest plate. A shimmer of light bloomed, then red. The Marine was blasted backward, thrown across the battlefield like a child's toy, crashing through a ruined wall. Masonry and metal collapsed in his wake, dust pluming skyward. The shockwave rippled outward, rattling helmets in the trench. The leader roared, charging through the haze, blade high. Gojo sidestepped, catching the chainsword's teeth in a pocket of infinity. They screamed impotently, sparks flaring, until he flicked his wrist and shoved the weapon aside. His foot came up in the same motion, driving into the Marine's midsection. Ceramite crumpled, a dent the size of a fist buckling inward. The giant staggered but did not fall. Another Marine surged in, chainblade whirling, Gojo ducked low, his blindfold slipping enough to flash a spark of sapphire eye. His elbow shot back, crunching into the giant's helm. The Marine reeled, staggering sideways. His visor cracked in a jagged starburst. Gojo chuckled. "Come on, you're supposed to be the scary ones." The Astartes didn't reply with words. They replied with fury. 3 at once this time, striking in a trident of blade, bolt, and fist. Their weapons blurred with speed no mortal eye could follow. To anyone else, it would have been certain death. To Gojo, it was a puzzle. He stepped into the flow, weaving between their arcs, infinity shimmering around him. A bolt shell stopped dead against his cheek, detonating into harmless sparks. A chainsword froze at his shoulder, teeth shrieking but unable to close. A fist swung wide, caught in a gravitational drag as Gojo whispered blue and pulled it just off course. He countered with casual efficiency. A flick of his fingers crumpled one Marine's knee inward, Servo screaming as he toppled. A lazy shove to another's chest sent him skidding back meters, boots carving furrows in the mud. The third Gojo simply sidestepped, tripping him with a hooked ankle like a schoolyard prank. The trench gasped. Laughter spilled from some hysterical, broken, while others wept into their hands. The leader came again, chainsword roaring like judgment. Gojo caught it flat-palmed, infinity halting the teeth in mid-scream. Sparks spat across his hand, his grin unbothered. "You hit hard," he said, cheerful, "but you still don't get it." His other hand rose, fingers curling. Space itself groaned, a tremor of pressure building. Red and blue swirled in miniature, clashing in his palm, their energies twisting until the air shimmered violet. The Marines faltered. Even their gene-forged nerves felt the wrongness of it, the sense of annihilation pooling in that single hand. The trench fell silent in breathless terror. Gojo's smile widened. Hollow purple. He loosed it. Not a full blast, not the gouging void that had erased a daemon, but a controlled arc that screamed across the field, tearing a path between the Marines. Mud, rock, and wreckage ceased to exist in its wake, the line gouged clean and smoking. The shockwave hurled the giants back, armor shrieking, earth collapsing beneath them. They rose, battered but unbroken, their voices a chorus of vox-roared fury.
"By his blood, by his will."
And still, Gojo laughed. The battlefield was already madness, but now it teetered into unreality. The guardsmen of the 23rd Veyron Rifles huddled in the trench, mud spattering their armor as shockwaves from the clash rolled over them. They had seen demons rip through reality, had seen entire platoons erased by a single sorcerer's whisper. They thought they knew what impossible looked like. They were wrong. Trooper Ives pressed her hands so tightly together her knuckles bled. Her prayers were no longer to the Emperor. They were to the white-haired man in the crater. She whispered his name like she had known it all her life, though she had never heard it until minutes ago. "Gojo! Gojo! Saint of Light! Gojo!" Her voice cracked but did not falter. The man next to her spat, eyes wide with fury. "Heretic!" he roared. "You call that filth a saint? He toys with the Astartes. He mocks the Emperor's chosen." His hands shook as he tried to raise his lasgun, but it clattered from his grip. His body would not obey. His faith trembled. Commissar Rain staggered along the firing step, his bolt pistol raised though his arm shook with exhaustion. His voice had gone ragged, throat shredded from screaming heresy for what felt like hours. The words had lost weight. Even he knew it. His men no longer obeyed. They stared past him into the field where the impossible man and the Emperor's angels tore reality apart. The Ordo's scribes were worse. One scribbled furiously, parchment stained with blood from bitten lips, every word contradicting the last. Unclassified. Witch. Saint. Daemon. Weapon. Salvation. Another had torn off his robes entirely, bare chest smeared with ink as he scrawled sigils across his skin. A third rocked back and forth, muttering, better a daemon, until the phrase dissolved into meaningless noise. Captain Severin stood among them, but apart. His boots were steady in the muck, his cap pulled low, his eyes fixed on the duel. He forced his breathing calm, but his chest felt hollow. He had believed in the Astartes all his life. He had believed that if nothing else in the galaxy was certain, the angels of death were. They were the Emperor's proof, his wrath given flesh. But now he saw them staggering under blows from a blindfolded man who laughed at their fury. He saw them adapt, strike in concert, and still fail to touch him. He saw their bolt guns reduced to fireworks, Their blades stopped inches from their mark. He saw one of them hurled backward like a rag doll, another crumpled to his knees, a third dented and stumbling. The faith in his chest wavered. It had survived plague, famine, daemons, and 1,000 deaths. But it could not survive this. His men were fracturing openly. Some had fallen to their knees, praising Gojo as the Emperor returned. Others spat curses, swearing they would die before naming him saint. Brothers shouted at brothers, bayonets raised not against the enemy but against each other. Faith had become a weapon turned inward. Severin felt the trench sliding toward mutiny. His hand twitched toward his saber, but he knew it was futile. No order could cut through this chaos. No bolt round could silence the sight of the impossible. He looked again at Gojo. The man was smiling, blindfold fluttering in the wind, hands in his pockets as he danced between angels. He laughed as if the world itself was a jest. Severin's lips moved before he realized. Not prayer, not curse, just a whisper. What are you? The ground trembled as hollow purple screamed across the field, gouging a trench in the earth, its violet afterglow staining the sky. The guardsmen shrieked, some clutching their heads, others laughing hysterically. One tore off his aquila and hurled it into the mud. Another pressed his forehead into the dirt, begging for mercy from a god he could no longer name. And still the angels of death roared. They rose, battered but unbroken, their voices a thunder of faith, by his blood, by his will. But to the mortals in the trench, their words sounded like desperation. Severin realized he was watching two faiths collide. One forged in millennia of doctrine, steel and sacrifice, the other born in a single man's smile, a laugh that denied the galaxy's cruelty. And though he hated himself for it, though every oath and catechism in his blood rebelled, Severin felt his heart tilt toward the latter, because it had been so long, too long, since anyone had laughed. Severin had been raised to believe in certainties. The Emperor was certainty. The Creed was certainty. The Angels of Death were certainty. Everything else was ash. His whole life had been built on those pillars. His scholar years had drilled obedience until his bones ached from it. His first campaign had burned hesitation from him, branded into his mind by commissars whose bolt pistols had gone off as easily as coughs. Every war since had carved him hollow until only duty remained. And duty had always been simple. Follow the chain of command, obey the creed, trust the angels. But now, as he watched Gojo dance between titans, laughing as violet annihilation gouged Earth from reality, certainty was collapsing like rotten scaffolding. He thought of his wife, gentle hands wasted to plague, her prayers unanswered. He thought of his sons, their faces solemn as they marched into conscription lines, never to be seen again. He thought of the thousands of men he had led to die, their bodies left in mud, their names burned away by administratum quills. He had told himself it was for the Emperor. He had told himself it was necessary, that duty was the only way mankind survived. He had told himself that certainty was enough. But watching Gojo, watching a man who smiled at daemons, who mocked Astartes with jokes about polish and choreography, who laughed in a galaxy that had forgotten what laughter was, it made something ache deep in Severin's chest. Something old, something buried, something human. It wasn't faith. It wasn't duty, it was envy. He envied that levity, that freedom, that lightness in a man who stood untouchable while gods of war strained to cut him down. Gojo had no chains on him, no catechisms, no commissar's pistol pressed to his skull. He laughed because he could, and Severin realized he couldn't remember the last time he had. His men were breaking apart all around him. Some prayed to Gojo outright, others cursed him as heretic. A few fought each other, bayonets raised, screams of saint and witch clashing in the mud. Rain shouted until blood flecked his lips, but his voice was as hollow as the lasguns clutched in trembling hands. The Astartes fought with all the fury of their creed, roaring by his blood, by his will. Their chainswords screamed, their bolters thundered, their armored bodies moved with divine precision. They were everything the Imperium promised. But Gojo laughed, and in that laughter, Severin heard something stronger than faith. He heard possibility. His mouth went dry. He hated the thought, hated it with every scar on his body, every oath in his soul, but it wouldn't leave him. He wanted to believe the Astartes would win. He wanted to believe the angels could end this stranger and restore the galaxy to the certainties he understood. But another part of him, The part that had once loved, once dreamed, once smiled, wanted the laughter to keep ringing. From the smoking craters of their drop pods, heavy servitors and weapon caches were deployed. Marines armed with plasma cannons and melter charges strode forward, their armor venting heat, their weapons glowing with the promise of annihilation. The air thickened with ozone and burning metal. The leader raised his chainsword high, vox booming across the battlefield.
Bring him down!
Plasma fire shrieked, melting the air itself, streams of incandescent death converging on the blindfolded man. And Gojo only grinned wider. The vox feed crackled, its picked capture flickering across a wall of dim lumens in the chamber of the black ship. Shadows danced across parchment-strewn desks, over Auspex arrays crusted with incense ash and the scrawls of warding script. The air smelled of hot dust, oil and sanctified wax. The Inquisitors sat in silence as the battle unfolded on grainy projection. On the screen, giants in ash-white armor struck and were turned aside. Bolt shells froze in the air, detonating harmlessly. Chainswords shrieked and halted mid-swing. A violet streak gouged a trench from the world itself. And through it all, the blindfolded man smiled, as though the galaxy's fury were a tavern brawl staged for his amusement. One acolyte whispered too loudly, his voice betraying awe. "Emperor, preserve us." Inquisitor Marek silenced him with a glance sharper than any blade. "The Emperor preserves nothing that cannot preserve itself," he said flatly. Another Inquisitor, older, her face veined with augmetic lines that glowed faintly in the dim, leaned forward. Inquisitrix Hester's voice rasped like vellum torn. "Not a daemon, no resonance. The warp recoils from him. And yet..." She gestured toward the feed, where Gojo danced between bolter shells as if skipping through falling leaves. "He is impossible." The pict blurred as another hollow purple tore across the field. Voxcasters hissed static, machine spirits whining at the strain of transmitting phenomena they were never designed to quantify. Scribes scribbled furiously, their quills scratching frantic as they tried to turn impossibility into reportable form. One acolyte dared to speak. "My lords, if he is not daemon and not psyker, then he is weapon," interrupted Lord Inquisitor Marek, his voice cut like iron. "A weapon too dangerous to be left unchecked. Or," Hester rasped, "a weapon too valuable to be discarded." Silence followed. The candle flames guttered in unseen currents. The feed shifted, showing Astartes regrouping, bringing plasma to bear. Gojo stood in the crater, his smile widening, blindfold fluttering as if in a wind only he felt. He tilted his head, hands in pockets, as though daring the galaxy to try harder. The third Inquisitor, Lord Vaira, gaunt, his robes immaculate, his eyes cold with a zeal that had burned cities, spoke at last. "Look at him. He does not kneel. He does not pray. He laughs at angels. No weapon forged by man or emperor could bear such insolence. He is heresy given flesh. He must be destroyed." Marek's lips thinned. "If he can erase daemons, would you cast that away?" Vaira's eyes flashed. "If he can erase daemons, what stops him from erasing us?" Hester leaned back, her metal joints hissing. "Perhaps nothing. That is why we must study him. Imagine it, a new breed of psyker, one not bound by the warp. A force humanity could wield without the stain of chaos. He could be the Emperor's gift." "Or his test," Vaira snapped. The acolytes dared not move, their quills scratched in stuttering motions, their eyes fixed on the floor. To speak in such a chamber was to risk being silenced forever. The feed flickered again. One Marine staggered back, dented ceramite smoking. Gojo laughed, bright and cruel, as though the battle were a game meant only for him. Marek steepled his gloved fingers. "Recruitment is impossible. He would not kneel. He would not bend. A study requires containment. Can he be contained?" "No," Vaira hissed. "Yes," Hester countered. Silence pressed down again, broken only by the crackle of static and the scribe's frantic scratching. At last, Marek spoke. "Then we have three paths. Destruction, containment, observation. Destruction is clean, but perhaps impossible. Containment is uncertain, perhaps catastrophic. Observation." His eyes flicked toward the glowing feed. "Observation is already happening. He teaches us with every gesture." Hester's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. "He is teacher. Even he said so." Vaira's face darkened. "Blasphemy. Every second he lives, faith fractures. Already the guard mutter of saints, already commissars falter. Every breath he takes erodes the creed." "Or strengthens it," Hester said, her voice sharp as knives. Faith untested is faith unproven. If he is witch, his fall will prove the Emperor's truth. If he is gift, his survival will prove his mercy. Either way, the creed adapts. It always does. Marek raised a hand, silencing them both. His eyes stayed on the feed, on the laughing figure who stood against angels. For now, we watch. Let the angels test him. Their deaths or his will write our next act. But know this, when the time comes, we will move. Whether to kill, to cage, or to learn, we will move. The chamber fell silent again, save for the flicker of static and the echo of Gojo's laughter, carried thin and distorted across the vox. It lingered in the air like heresy, like possibility, like a choice not yet made. The chamber had grown heavy with words, but none of them carried weight enough to decide. On the wall of vox feeds, the picked images flickered with smoke and ruin. The Astartes struck and struck again, their fury endless, their precision flawless. But each blow found nothing but laughter. Gojo swayed between them, blindfold fluttering, hands in his pockets as if the duel were a joke told at his expense. Chainswords screamed impotently, bolt shells blossomed into fireworks, plasma howled and left him untouched. Even the angels of death looked mortal in his presence. The Inquisitors stared in silence, their acolytes scribbling frantic contradictions onto parchment. The chamber smelled of incense and fear. Vera broke first. He slammed his fist into the table, vox static crackling with the movement. This cannot continue. Every second he stands, he undermines the creed. Every guardsman watching him is a soul drifting from the Emperor's light. Hester's voice rasped, brittle but sharp, or drifting toward a light we do not yet understand. She pointed with a skeletal finger at the flickering feed, where Gojo shoved an Astartes aside with a casual palm, denting ceramite like tinfoil. Look at him. The warp recoils. The daemon's died. He bends reality without the stink of witchcraft. If he is heresy of a new breed, one that does not bleed into chaos. Blasphemy, Vera spat, his eyes burning like a zealot's torch. You speak as though he is gift. He mocks the angels with his laughter. He refuses to kneel. Refuses to kneel, Hester cut in, her tone acid. Yes, that is what terrifies you most, isn't it? That he is unbound. That he is not bent into the shape the creed demands. That perhaps the Emperor himself is not the only font of power in this galaxy. The chamber hissed with sucked breaths. Even the scribes froze, quills hovering above parchment, too afraid to scratch such words into record. Marek spoke at last, his voice calm but weighted with iron. Enough. If this man cannot be touched by Astartes, then he cannot be dismissed as heretic or witch. He exists, he endures. That alone demands attention. He tapped a finger against the wood of the table, slow, deliberate. The question is no longer whether he should die. The question is whether he can. Silence. The word hung heavier than any sermon. The feed flickered again, showing hollow purple scream across the field, gouging the earth into smoking ruin. Astartes tumbled aside like ragdolls, their armor smoking, their fury unbroken, but their bodies faltering. The trench below erupted in noise, prayers, curses, laughter, sobs. Mortals watched faith itself unravel before their eyes. Hester leaned forward, her augmetic eyes glinting. Your angels cannot kill him. They will break themselves upon his barrier until nothing remains. Are we to waste the Emperor's finest lives proving what is already plain? Or do we move now before he grows bored and erases them all? Vera growled. He is cancer. You do not parley with cancer. Then burn him, Hester snapped back. But tell me, Vera, how do you burn what cannot be touched? The chamber fell into argument, voices overlapping, doctrine clashing with pragmatism. One demanded death, another demanded study, a third muttered of prophecy, a fourth insisted silence. Acolytes scribbled frantic shorthand, their parchment stained with ink blots from trembling hands. The machine spirits of the Auspex arrays groaned under the strain of capturing Gojo's distortions, screens flickering as though recoiling from his presence. Marek raised his hand, and the chamber quieted by force of habit. His eyes, dark and unblinking, stayed fixed on the flickering image of the laughing man. The angels cannot kill him, he said softly, but every ear bent to hear. That truth is plain. To continue is waste. To destroy him may be impossible. To ignore him is folly. That leaves us only one path. Even Vera could not deny it. He clenched his jaw, lips pressed white. Marek's voice sharpened. We parley, we confront, we speak to the man who laughs at demons. The chamber hissed with indrawn breath. For an Inquisitor to speak was to risk contamination, corruption, heresy. But the logic was iron. The Astartes would not prevail. The Imperium's hammer had struck and the anvil had not broken. Hester smiled thinly. At last, sanity. Vera spat onto the floor, but he did not protest. His silence was consent. Marek rose, his rosette glinting in the candlelight. Summon transport. Inform the Astartes that parley is declared under inquisitorial seal. If they resist, remind them who grants sanction to their chapter. His lips curved faintly, a shadow of irony. Let us see if the man who will not kneel will speak. The clash of Astartes and anomaly paused as a new sound rolled across the mud. The deep, resonant horns of authority, the vox broadcast of words no guardsman ever expected to hear. By order of the Holy Inquisition of His Most Divine Majesty, parley is declared. All forces will stand down. Guardsmen froze, lasguns halfway raised, commissars went pale. Even the angels of death hesitated, their weapons lowering fractionally as the weight of that word pressed into their vox nets. Parley. In the crater, Gojo cocked his head, blindfold fluttering. His grin widened. Well, he said, cheerful, amused. About time someone wanted to talk. The horns rolled across the battlefield like the voice of judgment itself. Voxcasters blared the words again and again, their distortion carrying them into every trench, every ruin, every mortal ear. By order of the Holy Inquisition of His Most Divine Majesty, parley is declared. All forces will stand down. The words hit harder than artillery. The 23rd Veteran froze where they knelt in the muck. Troopers who had been screaming prayers fell silent mid-word. Others who had been spitting curses choked on them. Commissar Rain lowered his bolt pistol as though it weighed a ton. Scribes stopped scratching ink, their quills hovering in air. No one moved. No one breathed. Because no one, not soldier, not priest, not bureaucrat, ever expected to hear the Inquisition's voice declare parley. To the rank and file, the Inquisition was rumor and terror. Whispers in the night, faceless names scrawled on orders of censure and execution. They did not appear in trenches. They did not speak to men of mud. They were spectres that erased entire regiments with a single word. And now they were here. Trooper Ives fell to her knees, sobbing. We're all dead, all of us. He's cursed us, brought them here. Another guardsman slapped her, tears in his own eyes. Quiet, do you want them to hear? They'll burn us just for... He cut himself off, trembling, gaze darting skyward as though expecting black ships to materialize overhead and scour them with fire. Commissar Rain staggered along the firing step, mouth opening and closing like a fish. His entire career had been built on certainty, that he could brand heresy, pull a trigger and silence dissent. But against this, against inquisitorial horns and declarations of parley with a laughing heretic, his authority was ash. He holstered his pistol with shaking hands. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. The scribes broke next. One threw down his parchment and tore at his robes, screaming that the end had come. Another clutched his sheets to his chest, eyes wild, babbling that history was being written in his hands. A third simply stared into the feed's distant glow, lips moving silently, as if trying to decide whether to call this figure saint or antichrist. Captain Severin stood rigid, boots buried in the mud, his chest hollow. He had heard many horns in his life, retreat, advance, bombardment, ceasefire, but never parley. The word was poison and miracle both. The Inquisition did not parley. They judged, they destroyed. And yet the horns echoed still, carrying across no man's land into the ears of Astartes and Anomaly alike. Severin's men looked to him for orders. His throat locked. What could he say? That the Emperor's will was being spoken? That parley meant safety? That parley meant doom. The words refused to form. For the first time in 30 years of service, he had nothing to command. He looked at Gojo, standing in his crater, blindfold fluttering, grin wide. The man who had danced through chainswords and bolt shells, who had laughed at angels, now tilted his head like a curious child listening to a new tune. And Severin understood then what no catechism had ever taught him. This was not war anymore. This was revelation. And revelations killed more men than bullets. The horns faded, but the silence that followed was heavier still. Every guardsman in the trench craned their necks skyward, watching with wide, unblinking eyes. Even the commissars, so quick to bark orders, stood mute. Only the distant crackle of fires and the groan of tortured metal filled the air. Then they came. The gunships broke through the cloud cover first, their hulls blacker than void, their wings marked with the sigil that froze blood in veins, the letter I framed by skull and purity seals. Vox chatter died instantly. Lasguns lowered without command. Entire regiments shrank into themselves like children before a scolding parent. The craft descended slow, deliberate, as though the air itself yielded to them. Engines thundered, rattling the bones of every man who watched. When their landing skids touched earth, the sound was not thunder. It was judgment. Hatches opened. Incense spilled, burning sweet and acrid, and the Inquisitors stepped into the mud. Their presence hit harder than the Astartes. The angels were gods of war, colossal, roaring, physical. But the Inquisitors were worse. Men and women who needed no size, no ceramite, no blade to dominate. Their very rosettes bent the world. They walked with the weight of 1,000 verdicts carved into their shadows. Guardsmen dropped to their knees, faces pressed into muck. Some sobbed openly. Others whispered prayers so quickly the words blurred. Commissar Rain tried to speak, to bark discipline, but his voice cracked into silence at the sight of them. Even Captain Severin lowered his gaze, unable to meet their eyes. The Inquisitors crossed the field like black-clad omens. Acolytes trailed them, carrying auspexes, reliquaries, parchment scrolls that fluttered in the wind. Servo skulls hovered above, recording every breath. They stopped at the crater's edge. Gojo tilted his head, blindfold fluttering. His grin widened. You must be the managers. Finally. I was starting to think this whole show didn't have a director. The guardsman dared not breathe. To hear him mock the Inquisition was like hearing a child laugh at a firing squad. Lord Inquisitor Marek stepped forward. His robes were plain, his face unscarred, but his voice rolled like a verdict. You stand accused of heresy by existence alone, by power unsanctioned, by laughter unworthy of this soil. Name yourself or be ended. Gojo chuckled, lifting his blindfold just enough to show one glittering blue eye. Name's Gojo, teacher sometimes, tourist right now. As for the heresy part, he shrugged, not my problem. The trench erupted in murmurs, some hissed curses. Others gasped as if he'd spat on the Emperor's throne. Inquisitrix Hester leaned forward, her voice a rasp. The warp recoils from you, the daemons perish at your touch. Yet you bear no mark of psyche, no resonance. What are you? Gojo's grin widened. Better question, what are you? All robes and scowls. I half expected you to be taller. Gasps rippled through the trench. Severin's stomach knotted. Even Astartes shifted slightly, their helm lenses narrowing. To mock an Inquisitor was to beg for death. But Hester only narrowed her augmetic eyes, studying him as though he were a puzzle. Vaera snarled, stepping forward, his rosette raised like a weapon. You dare laugh in the face of the Inquisition? You will kneel. By his will, you will prostrate yourself. Gojo tilted his head. His voice was light, almost pitying. You people really love that word, don't you? Kneel, kneel, kneel. Ever try standing on your own? The silence that followed was a chasm. To the guardsmen, it was blasphemy beyond comprehension. To the Inquisitors, it was a knife. Marek's tone sharpened. If you will not kneel, then you will answer. Where do you come from? What power do you wield? Gojo spread his hands as if displaying nothing. Different world. Different rules. Power? Call it cursed technique if you like. Doesn't matter. All you need to know is this. Your daemons can't touch me. Your angels can't touch me. Your bullets can't touch me. I'm not here to kneel. I'm here to see what kind of joke this galaxy is. The words carried across the field, echoing into trenches, vox feeds, parchment records. Some guardsmen wept, others whispered prayers to him outright. Faith was splitting like cracked glass. Severin's throat worked. He wanted to shout, to order silence, to cling to the certainties drilled into him, but his chest felt hollow. He had no words. Hester's voice broke the tension. He cannot be killed. He cannot be caged. To waste lives is folly. Parley was the only path. Now we test him with questions. Vaera spat. Blasphemy. He is witch, saint, or godling. Nothing in between. To treat with him is heresy. Marek's eyes never left Gojo, perhaps. But what is heresy if not the beginning of truth not yet canonized? The trench shuddered with the weight of the phrase. To hear such words from an Inquisitor was to hear the galaxy tilt. Gojo chuckled, blindfold slipping back over his eyes. Finally, someone speaking my language. He took a step closer, hands still in his pockets, grin sharp as broken glass. So what's it gonna be, Inquisitors? Keep swinging your toys at me, or admit you want to know what I know. The silence that followed was not absence. It was tension, coiled and snapping, every guardsman, every commissar, every marine holding breath as the Inquisition itself faced a choice. And Severin realized with sick clarity, whatever choice they made, the galaxy would not be the same after this moment. The air in the crater was heavier than the gunsmoke. It pressed on every chest, mortal and posthuman alike. The Inquisitors stood at the rim, their acolytes and servo-skulls recording every twitch. The Angels of Death loomed behind them, armor steaming, their blades still humming with caged violence. And in the center of it all stood Gojo, blindfolded, grinning like a man on holiday. Marek's voice broke the silence. You stand before the Inquisition, accused by existence. You laugh while the galaxy burns. Why should you not be ended here and now? Gojo tilted his head. Because you can't, he chuckled, light and almost kind. Seriously though, don't look so grim. You act like smiling's a crime. Hester leaned forward, her augmetic optics whirring as they focused on his blindfold. Your power bends space, yet carries no warp signature. That is impossible. Tell us, anomaly, from what world do you come? What god or daemon blessed you? Gojo rubbed the back of his neck, grin never quite fading. World? Not this one. That's for sure. No god, no daemon, no blessing. Just me, born this way. He paused, then added with mock seriousness, I was pretty good looking even as a kid too. So maybe that's a blessing? A few guardsmen choked on their breaths. Commissar Rain's lips trembled in fury. Even one of the Astartes shifted, as though the absurdity had rattled a nerve. Vera stepped forward, rosette lifted high, his voice a thunderclap. You dare blaspheme in jest? The Emperor's galaxy is no tavern for your mockery. Gojo smiled wider. Everything's a tavern if you know how to drink. The trench gasped again, but Marek silenced them with a gesture. His eyes stayed fixed on Gojo, sharp and unblinking. You call this galaxy a joke? Explain yourself. For a heartbeat, Gojo's smile softened. He exhaled slowly, shoulders loosening. That was a joke. I said it because it was easier than admitting I have no idea what's going on. His voice was lighter still, but there was a thread of truth beneath it now. One moment I was fighting, and then something exploded, reality cracked, and suddenly, bam, here I am. New world, new rules, new people pointing very big swords at me. He scratched his head, blindfold slipping enough to show a flicker of tired blue eye. So yeah, I laughed. Because what else do you do when you wake up in someone else's nightmare? I don't have a plan. I don't have a purpose here. Honestly, his grin turned wistful. I just want to go home. The silence that followed was heavier than any sermon. Guardsmen froze mid-prayer. Commissars' mouths hung open. Even the angels, their chain blades dripping, seemed to hesitate. The word home had not been heard on this soil in a long time. Hester's voice softened, almost reverent. If you speak truth, then you are not weapon, not witch, but exile, a wanderer cast from his own world. Vera spat into the mud. Lies, trickery, he smiles and seduces, but his heart is poison. He mocks the creed, refuses the Emperor, and calls this holy galaxy a joke. Gojo chuckled, the lightness creeping back into his tone. You're half right. I do think it's a joke, but not because I hate it, because it's too heavy. You people live like you're drowning every second of the day. Maybe the only way I can breathe here is to laugh. The words carried across the trench like blasphemy and gospel both. Some guardsmen whispered prayers to him, others hissed curses. Captain Severin felt his throat dry, his heart torn between envy and terror. Marek studied him, fingers steepled. If what you say is true, then your power is unbound, your loyalty unclaimed, your future unwritten. That makes you either the greatest threat mankind has ever faced, or its greatest gift. Gojo grinned again, tilting his head. Or maybe just a guy who wants to go home. The tension stretched, taut as a wire. The Inquisitors stared. The angels loomed. The mortals in the trenches held their breath. And for the first time since the battle began, Gojo's laughter sounded less like mockery and more like truth. Up above, the Astartes shifted. Their bolt guns lowered reluctantly. Their chainswords still hummed, hungry for blood, but their helm lenses glared at the rosettes raised above them, the sigils of Inquisition commanding stand down. For warriors bred to obey only the Emperor, it was a humiliation deeper than wound. They had struck with all the fury of demigods, and still the man had laughed at them. Now they were ordered to wait, to watch, to yield ground to words. Inside their helms, teeth clenched. Some whispered litanies of patience. Others cursed beneath their breath. One swore silently that when parley ended, he would finish what was begun, no matter the order. The angels of death did not fear. They did not doubt, but they did rage. And to stand idle before a laughing anomaly was a wound they would not forget. The dialogue pressed deeper. The Inquisitors stood at the crater's edge like judges before a pyre. Servo skulls drifted above them, Auspex lenses ticking, recording every syllable. The angels stood back, their armor steaming, their chain blades still vibrating with the thirst for blood. The guardsmen dared not raise their heads. Murek's voice cut the silence. "If you are no psyker, no daemon, no saint, then what claim do you make? Who do you serve?" Gojo tilted his head, blindfold shifting with the breeze. His grin widened. "Serve? No one. Not here, anyway." He shrugged. "Back home, I was a teacher. Kids. Brats, really. Annoying, loud, curious, but worth my time. Out here," he chuckled. "I'm just sightseeing." Gasps rippled through the trench. Sightseeing. The word landed like heresy, a trivialization of faith, duty, and blood. Hester's augmetic optics, word narrowing. Then you are weapon without master, power without loyalty. Do you not see how dangerous that is? To yourself? To all? Gojo chuckled softly. Dangerous to who exactly? The daemons I erased? The swords that couldn't touch me? Or the people who can't imagine a life without someone telling them to kneel? Vera snarled. His rosette glinted as he raised it like a brand. This galaxy is the Emperor's. Every soul lives by his grace and dies by his will. To deny him is to spit in the face of humanity itself. Gojo tilted his head, smile sharpening. Then maybe humanity needs better aim. The words rang across the battlefield like a gunshot. The guardsmen flinched. Some began weeping prayers, others cursing. Rain's mouth foamed as he tried to shriek heresy, but his voice cracked into silence. Marek's tone remained calm, but iron beneath. If you will not kneel, then you must choose. The Imperium is vast, its enemies endless. You could be weapon against them, an ally, perhaps even sanctified. Serve us, and your laughter may yet echo as proof of his will. Gojo leaned back, hands in his pockets. His grin softened, turned wistful for a heartbeat. I told you already. I don't want your throne, don't want your titles. I don't even want to be here, I just want to go home. That word again, home. It cut through the smoke sharper than any blade. Mortals whispered it like a memory of warmth long buried. The angels stood like statues, their silence deeper than the trench's prayers. Hester spoke at last, voice brittle. Then you will not serve. You will not kneel, you will not claim, and yet you will not leave. Gojo smiled again, bright, sharp, disarming. Guess that makes me a problem, huh? The silence that followed was thunderous. The angels of death. They were bred for certainty. The angels of death were the Emperor's wrath made flesh, warriors stripped of hesitation, sculpted to be absolute. They did not falter, they did not doubt, until now. Behind their helm lenses, the ash-white Astartes seethed. Their armor still hummed with the heat of battle, their chain blades itched to bite again, their bolt guns yearned for release. But the rosettes had spoken, and the Inquisition's seal had chained them tighter than ceramite. They had struck with the fury of demigods. Their blows could fell tyrannid monstrosities, could crack orc war engines, could cut through daemon flesh. And yet every strike had been met with laughter, every swing halted by invisible walls. Every bolt round reduced to spark and smoke. They had not lost. They had been made irrelevant. That was worse. Brother Captain Thane's teeth ground together behind his Vox grill. He had led campaigns against the Eldar, crushed Genestealer cults, burned heretic worlds to ash. He had lost brothers, aye, but never dignity. And yet here, on this nameless field, dignity had been stolen by a blindfolded man with a smile. He could feel the shame in his squad, though none voiced it. Brother Marius whispered litanies louder than necessary, his voice cracking. Brother Cador flexed the grip on his chainsword again and again, servos whining as if longing for release. Even stoic Brother Librarian Halvik, whose soul had weathered demonic screams, felt the tremor of insult gnawing at his pride. They were the Emperor's sword, and they had been ordered to sheath themselves. It was not fear that burned them. They did not fear this anomaly, no matter how untouchable he seemed. It was rage. Rage that their strikes had glanced off nothing. Rage that their faith was made spectacle. Rage that mortals in mud trenches had watched angels falter. To be denied the kill was humiliation. To be denied even the fight was desecration. Thane's mind churned with litanies of patience, but they tasted of ash. He could feel the eyes of the guardsmen burning into their armor, see their broken faith reflected in the shine of mud. The angels were no longer proof of certainty. They were reminders of failure. The Inquisitors, Horns had declared parley and they had obeyed. But in their hearts, in the marrow of gene-forged bones, the Astartes swore oaths unspoken. This insult would not be forgotten. This laughter would not be endured. This anomaly would be ended someday, somehow, even if it meant disobedience. The battlefield had gone still, save for the crack of fires feeding on ruined armor. Where moments ago bolters had thundered and chain blades had sung, now silence lay like a weight across the trenches. Every eye was turned to the blindfolded figure standing in the crater, hands in his pockets, as though he were bored of the show. "All right," Gojo said at last, breaking the hush as casually as if he were addressing a classroom. "You want answers? Take me in. Ask your questions. I'll play along." The words hit harder than artillery. Men who had stood with blades raised sagged uncertain. Commissars froze mid-gesture. Even the angels seemed to hesitate within their armor. It was not surrender. It was not defeat. It was a man volunteering to walk into their jaws with a smile. Vera spat as if to cleanse the air. Mockery. He believes himself guest when he is beast. He believes chains are garlands. Gojo grinned, head tilting. Chains, garlands, depends how you wear them. Either way, I'm still the prettiest guy in the room. Gasps rippled through the trench. Captain Severin's throat closed around words he might have said. No catechism covered this moment. Marek, however, only lifted his chin and spoke with the tone of a judge pronouncing sentence. "You will come with us. You will be questioned. Every truth will be tested, every lie scourged. You will not laugh when we are finished." Gojo's smile softened, almost wistful. "That sounds like a challenge, but fine. Lead the way." The rosettes turned, and the order went out. Gunships descended in thunderous formation, wings etched with the sigil that froze mortals to their marrow. Dust and ash billowed as the craft settled. Guardsmen pressed their foreheads to the mud. Some sobbed openly, others whispered prayers, but none dared raise their eyes as the anomaly was taken aboard with the Inquisition's black retinue. The Sanctis Gloria was no ship. It was a floating cathedral with engines grafted to it, its vaults vaster than cities, its corridors lit by the steady glow of 1,000 censers. It breathed incense and spoke in the language of bells and steel. Here, among its sanctified bulkheads, even angels walked softly. Gojo's cell was a sermon carved into iron. The walls pulsed with hexagrammic wards, their lines glowing faintly with each heartbeat of the ship. Null emitters hummed like bees in a hive, radiating a pressure meant to smother thought. Black stone sigils were carved so deep the gouges could never be polished smooth. He sat cross-legged on the deck as though it were tatami, humming tunelessly, the blindfold still fixed in place. The wards hissed around him, but he seemed more annoyed by the stale air than the pressure of 1,000 protections. 3 figures came to stand beyond the grill. Marek, hands clasped behind his back, eyes sharp as the edge of a whetstone. Hester, her augmetics whirring as her optics focused on every flicker of breath, slate clutched like scripture. And Vyra, rosette clenched as if it were a weapon in its own right. Servo skulls drifted overhead, their quills scratching furiously as they recorded every syllable. "State your origin," Marek said, voice steady. Gojo leaned back on his hands. "Different world, different rules, different fight." Then, boom, something cracked, and here I am. "Your place isn't exactly tourist-friendly, by the way." "Lies." Vera's voice rasped with zeal. "No soul crosses the Immaterium by accident. Guess I'm just clumsy." Gojo shrugged. Hester adjusted her optics, lines of code spilling across her slate. "Your field bends space, the warp recoils from you. That cannot be. Even nulls leave traces. What are you?" Gojo tapped his chin, then smiled wide. "Tall, handsome, single. Want me to fill out the rest of the form?" Acolytes stiffened. One made the sign of the Aquila on his chest with trembling fingers. Vera slammed the grill, the sound like a hammer. "You laugh at the throne. You deny the master of mankind." Gojo's head tilted. Expression unreadable beneath the blindfold. I don't deny him. I just don't know him. Where I come from, people stand on their own 2 feet. The silence that followed was heavier than the wards. Marek's eyes narrowed. Then you are without loyalty. Power without master. Do you understand what that makes you? A danger not only to us, but to yourself. Gojo chuckled softly, though it lacked its usual edge. Dangerous to who? The demons I erased? The angels who couldn't touch me? Or to people who can't imagine a world without someone kneeling? The words rang like heresy and gospel both. Acolytes flinched. One scribe dropped his quill, ink spilling across parchment. Hester's fingers froze on her slate. Marek pressed on, voice like iron ground against stone. You could serve. You could be weapon, ally, perhaps even sanctified. Serve the Imperium, and you might find your laughter echoes as proof of his will. For the first time, Gojo's grin faltered. He looked down, as if the deck plate itself had drawn his attention, and when he spoke, it was softer. I told you already. I don't want your throne. I don't want your wars. I don't even want to be here. He lifted his head then, and though the blindfold still hid his eyes, the weight of truth pressed against the chamber. I just want to go home. The words rippled through the chamber like a heresy too fragile to kill. Acolytes whispered prayers. Vyra trembled with rage. Hester's lenses clicked, but she wrote nothing. Even Marek hesitated, as though the verdict he had prepared no longer fit. Gojo smiled again, bright but wistful. But until then, you can keep asking. I don't mind. Just don't expect me to stop laughing. The interrogations did not end that day. They began again the next, and the next, and the next after that. The Inquisition did not tire, for it was not permitted to. Men may sleep, women may falter, machine spirits may groan, but Inquisitors endured by creed and by will. And so, day upon day, they returned to the blindfolded figure in the warded chamber, determined to pull from him something solid, something that could be weighed and measured and filed into the order of their impossible galaxy. On the second day, they came armed with catechism. Hester intoned the Litany of Origins, voice mechanical in its precision, while Servo Skull's word and etched her words into fresh vellum. She demanded acknowledgement of the throne, of the God Emperor's singular divinity, of the duty owed by all who drew breath. Gojo tilted his head as if she had asked him a riddle about the weather. Sorry, don't know him. Back home, people don't kneel every 5 minutes. They just live, messy but their own. The words unsettled more than his laughter ever could. Acolytes stiffened. One muttered blasphemy until Vyra silenced him with a backhand. On the third day, they tried temptation. Vyra thundered threats of the pyre and execution. Hester dangled promises of sanctification, that he could be more than man, weaponized faith itself. Marek leaned forward with the calm weight of a judge. Serve, and you may yet be canonized. Serve, and your laughter may echo as proof of his will. Gojo chuckled softly. You keep dangling crowns in front of me like I'm supposed to want them. I don't. I don't want your throne or your wars. I don't even want to be here. His grin faltered, just for a breath, long enough to leave its ghost behind. I just want to go home. That word struck deeper than heresy. It left silence in its wake, a silence none of them cared to break. On the fourth day, he turned their questions back on them. Why don't you people laugh? He asked Marek, tone innocent as a child's. Why do you wear faces like funeral masks all the time? Does it make the work easier? Or do you think if you ever smiled, the whole galaxy would break? None of them answered. Vyra snarled curses. Hester wrote furiously on her slate, as though documenting the question absolved her from facing it. Marek only stood in silence, eyes like a man staring at an abyss he did not want to measure. On the fifth day, the ship began to change. The astropathic choir screamed mid-prayer, voices rising until commissarial pistols barked and the screams stopped. Cogitators stuttered, spitting out strings of nonsense that looped back into themselves. Servo skulls fizzed and sparked near his cell, optics cracking. The null emitters hummed harder, their machine spirits straining as though suffocated. Gojo stretched, yawned, and smirked at the chaos outside his cell. Guess I break your toys just by breathing. He said it lightly, but behind the words flickered something else, something not playful at all. The grin stayed, but his shoulders carried a weight none of them had seen before. And the Inquisitors felt it too, Something vast was pressing closer, closer with every passing hour. They told themselves it was him. They told themselves it had to be. But in their hearts, each knew the truth. The storm was coming, and when it broke, no creed or rosette would hold it back. The fifth night on the Sanctis Gloria broke differently. The ship's machine spirits sang off-key. Voxcasters stammered out fragments of prayer with syllables reversed, and the lumen strips along the sanctified corridors dimmed as if shadows had grown teeth. The interrogations had become routine by then. Marek's measured questions, Hester's mechanical recitations, Vera's rage hammering uselessly against a wall of smiles. But tonight the chamber shivered before the Inquisitors had even spoken. The wards along the walls guttered like candles in a draught. The nullfield emitters clicked, coughed, and fell silent. Gojo sat cross-legged as always, blindfold neat, hands resting lightly on his knees. He cocked his head to the side, listening as the ship trembled under some pressure no chart had predicted. His grin sharpened. "You feel that?" he asked, voice low, almost curious. "It's getting closer." Hester's optics snapped toward the failing wards. "Increase field output," she barked at the nulltechs. They obeyed, but their machine spirits whimpered like beaten hounds. The runes on the walls sputtered and died one by one. Alarms split the silence. Red warning glyphs strobed down every corridor. The Vox screamed a single word: breaches. The Sanctis Gloria shuddered as though some vast hand had seized it. Bulkheads groaned, steel weeping stress. In the choir pit, the astropaths shrieked until their throats tore. Commissars drew pistols and ended them where they sat, but the screams carried on without mouths. And then it came. The hangar deck split open, not with steel or fire, but with absence. Reality peeled apart, curling back in sheets like burning parchment. Beyond lay a darkness deeper than void, not emptiness, but a place already crowded with eyes. Clawed hands the size of gunships reached through, dragging their owner with them. The greater daemon forced its bulk into the hangar with obscene inevitability. Wings like flayed cathedrals unfolded, scraping the ceiling. Its skull gaped like a chapel built to mock prayer, teeth longer than drop pods. Its raw, bent gravity drove mortals to their knees weeping. Astartes lined fire lanes, bolters blazing, chain blades screaming, but their fury pattered against it like rain on stone. Marek's jaw tightened. "Release him." Vera spun, face a mask of bloodless rage. "No! Better the ship burn than... Release him!" Hester's voice was steel shorn of hesitation. The keys turned. The grille rattled open. The cell fell silent. Gojo rose to his feet, rolling his shoulders as though shaking off a long nap. His blindfold fluttered in the ship's unnatural wind. He gave them the same grin he always had, but it cut thinner, sharper now, stripped of play. "Big one," he murmured. "You've been saving your boss fight." He stepped past them, hands in his pockets, the storm bending around him as though unwilling to touch. The Inquisitors fell back despite themselves. The angels who had failed to cut him down before stood frozen, bolters smoking, their shame now tempered with awe, the daemon's attention fixed on him instantly. Dozens of eyes burst open across its hide, each one focusing, each one widening in recognition and hate. Its roar tore at the seams of the ship, shaking steel loose from steel. Gojo tilted his head, as if acknowledging a student late to class. "Close your eyes," he said gently. His voice carried through Vox, Lumen, and Skull alike. Even those who did not hear with ears obeyed. Marek obeyed. Hester obeyed. Vyra did not. His pupils dilated to oceans, and his scream echoed long after his voice was gone. Gojo folded his hands together. The air warped. Sound thinned. The ship seemed to pull taut, as though reality itself braced for what came next. "Domain expansion," he whispered. "Unlimited void." The world broke. Not light, not dark. Infinity. A tide of comprehension without edge, awareness without mercy. Every mortal on the deck collapsed under the weight of it, their minds flooded with truths they had no capacity to hold. Guardsmen sobbed laughter until their lungs bled. Commissars clawed their eyes raw. Astartes staggered, knees bent, gene-forged wills splintering as 1,000 impossible revelations crushed down on them. Inquisitors clenched their teeth until blood filled their mouths, machine spirits shrieking static through their augmetics. The daemon screamed louder than all of them. Not in defiance, not in rage, but in erasure. Warp flesh unstitched, wings atomized, its every sigil rewritten into nullity. It convulsed and howled as its very concept was overwritten, until nothing remained but the silence of something that had never been. And still the sphere pulsed, tearing the ship apart. Lines of the hangar folded into nonsense, rivets spilled into vapor. Through the unraveling air a wound opened, not into the warp, but elsewhere. A wind poured through, carrying scents that had no right to be here. Rain on hot stone, cedar, chalk, the faint hiss of brakes on a city train. Gojo turned toward it, blindfold trembling in the impossible breeze. For the first time his grin was small, tired, human. "Well," he said softly, "looks like my stop." Marek lifted a hand, desperate. "If you step through..." Gojo cut him off with a gentle wave. "Don't worry, I don't hate you, I just don't belong." He paused at the threshold, 1 foot in rain, 1 foot on iron deck plate, and gave them a small, foolish wave, the kind a teacher gives to students he pretends not to miss. "Try laughing," he said, "not at the pain, in spite of it." And then he was gone. The rift snapped shut. Silence crushed the hangar. Mortals lay weeping, Astartes bowed in shame, Inquisitors hollow with awe. The ship's bells began to toll, pulled by trembling human hands, because no one knew what else to do. Silence reigned in the hangar long after the rift had sealed. Not the silence of peace, nor of victory, but of a choir struck dumb after glimpsing a verse not meant for human throats. The daemon was gone, erased so thoroughly that even its absence left no shadow. Gojo was gone, stepping into a world that smelled of rain. What remained was the echo of infinity, and the men and women who had touched it. Marek stood with his hands at his sides. He had been unmoved by fire and plague, unmoved by heretics who proclaimed themselves gods, unmoved even by the shriek of daemons clawing out of the warp. But now his breath came shallow, his tongue heavy as lead. Words like heresy and revelation circled his mind like carrion birds, and for the first time in decades, he did not know which one to choose. Hester had dropped her slate at some point. Ink still bled across its surface. Her augmetic optics whirred erratically, as though even the machine in her skull was trying to forget what it had seen. She pressed one trembling hand against her face, as if afraid she would discover another pair of eyes opening there. Vera lay on the deck, twitching, mouth foaming with fragments of scripture that no longer arranged themselves into sense. Acolytes knelt over him, whispering prayers that trailed into sobs. One of them broke entirely, laughing until blood ran from his nose, unable to stop, unable to remember why laughter was forbidden. The Astartes rose slowly, like titans waking from drowned dreams. Some crossed themselves in motions they had not made since childhood. Others pressed gauntleted fingers to their helms, as if to claw away the memory. Brother Captain Thane stood in silence, the dent still creasing his helm from their earlier humiliation, and whispered a single phrase over and over. He should not exist. He should not exist. But his gene-forged heart hammered the words hollow. The serfs and tech priests clutched the rails, staring at their own hands as though expecting to find them etched with alien scripture. One burned his own palm against a lumen sconce, crying with relief that the flesh still blistered, that he was still human. Another knelt in the corner and recited the Emperor's name until it cracked into laughter, laughter until it broke into screams. Faith fractured in every soul present. For some, it calcified. They clung to the Emperor's name harder, knuckles white, determined to bury what they had seen beneath the only certainty left to them. To them, Gojo was a test, a whisper of temptation, a mirage cast by the great enemy. His laughter had been poison, his power a lie. They would spend the rest of their days denouncing him, louder than they had ever denounced any heretic before, because only volume could drown the doubt in their bones. For others, the fracture spread like cracks in glass. They had seen angels fail, inquisitors falter, wards sputter like cheap candles, all undone by a man who laughed at blades and spoke of home as if such a place were real. They had felt infinity pour into them, raw and merciless, and found no trace of the Emperor's hand in it. To them, Gojo was no test. He was proof that the Imperium was smaller than it claimed to be, its doctrines a veil stretched thin across something vast and uncaring. And for many, silence was all that remained. Silence, and the knowledge that there were no words left to cover what they had touched. No catechism, no oath, no hymn. They would carry the weight of it alone, eyes dim with the memory of infinite light. The Sanctis Gloria drifted in the void, engines coughing, hulls scarred. Inquisitorial scribes dutifully wrote their reports, but their hands shook and their ink smeared. The Astartes submitted their litanies of endurance, but their voices quavered. The acolytes cleaned blood from the deck, whispering prayers that fell flat against steel. And in the heart of it all, each soul who had lived through the impossible carried a wound the ecclesiarchy would never be able to name. The galaxy had always been heavy, oppressive, inevitable. But Gojo Satoru had passed through it like laughter through a funeral, and nothing, not even the Emperor's light, felt as certain as it had before.